two Dean Stotts. There's the one on social media, guest speaking, representing brands. But 75% of what we do, the world doesn't know exactly what we do behind the scenes.
Dean Stott is a former British Special Forces soldier who served in the Special Boat Service, SBS. After a career-ending parachute accident, he transitioned into the private security sector, gaining renown for handling high-risk situations, including evacuating the Canadian embassy in Libya. He also starred in Netflix's Toughest Forces on Earth. Dean is now a motivational speaker, security consultant, and podcaster known for tackling extreme challenges.
I said to my dad, I would join the military. He told me I'd last 2 minutes. That was his response. And I was like, okay. I joined the army at the age of 17 and a half. I said, Lana, I might have an idea. I was listening to these security companies, and they were charging 6-7-figure sums for crisis management and evacuation plans, which weren't actually in place. I said to Lana, I said, look, I want to find a niche within the industry. I was just doing different jobs. One phone call would be, could you take the UAE royal family super yacht from Barcelona to Maldives? I was like, yeah, of course, beautiful. And then the next one, I put together a team and we're training the Kurdish Special Forces to fight ISIS. So I was out in Benghazi and it was September 11th, 2012. It's an important date. Some people, listeners will know, it's when your American ambassador got killed in Benghazi. So I was there that night.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Built for This podcast, Stories of a Maverick. I am honored to introduce Dean Stott, who we have on today, from UK Special Forces operator to world record holding endurance athlete and security consultant. So we're going to kind of get into all the things from how high stakes decision making in extreme environments translates into entrepreneur and leadership. So welcome, Dean. I'm excited you're here.
Thank you for having me, Jenna. Yeah, I think I am after my wife.
You are. And excited to everybody to hear how your story is. I connect both separately and then together as well, because it's a pretty amazing partnership. But kind of similar to how I like to start with everybody, I would love to kind of understand and hear more about how you grew up and sort of kind of, if there were any sort of moments along the way that really helped kind of shape your path towards the decision you made to serve your country.
I was born into a military family. My dad was in the military. My grandparents both served. So obviously, when you're born into that environment, you tend to move wherever your father gets posted, wherever that is around the world. In the UK, that tends to be about every 3 years. So as a young child, every time I started getting established and started building friendships, we would move totally different location, long before social media. So there was no way of being able to keep contact these people. At the age of 8, I remember one morning my mother grabbed me and my sisters out of bed and very sneakily took us downstairs, walked through the living room, gave us breakfast, but I noticed there was blood on the walls in the living room as we were passing through. We went on a train and ended up going north to Manchester, where she was from originally. And when we got to Manchester, she told us that she'd left my father and that was it. We're not going back. And I was very close to my dad. Because to get a house, we had to declare ourselves homeless. So we ended up in a homeless shelter in Moss Side in Manchester. So Moss Side in Manchester in the mid-80s was the most dangerous place in the UK at the time. I was me and my sisters, the only Caucasian kids in the school. So straight away that was attracting attention. And so from the age of 8, I started fighting. I was fighting in the playground and literally just to protect myself and my sisters. Removed from that school for my safety, and we went to another school. But during this whole period of time, my father, he put his career on hold. He had actually been promoted and was going to go to Germany. And he said, no, I want to stay in UK and I want to get custody of my kids. So my father travel every second weekend. He would drive 240 miles to come get us and take us home back down south. And so that was my sort of respite from being back to the fence in the corner in the playground and fighting to actually just being a child again. Fast forward another year and it goes to court and the judge basically says that he's not going to split the siblings up. He wants them to stay together and they make the decision where they want to go. Or we had an input into the decision,
Right.
Being the eldest of the 3, and they say now I'm 10, I had that weight on my shoulders that, and I was close to my father and I chose my father over my mother. And my dad got custody of my sisters. And we then went back down south to Aldershot, where he was based. And Aldershot at the time was the home of the British Army. It's like Fort Bragg. Yeah, you've got guys falling out the sky, literally parachuting. Everywhere you went, there was people wearing uniforms. So you were immersed in that environment. But it never turned my head that I wanted to be in the military. I actually always wanted to be a fireman. And when schooling, this is back in 93 when I was 16, finished school, and then you go on to college for a couple of years and then you go to university. You go through that whole process as you do here. I finished school. My dad was very strict in the fact that
Imagine.
before I could go out and play any sport, I had to make sure I did my homework. But then when I went to college, it wasn't as, you had a lot of flexible time. I mean, like you had a morning off or you had an afternoon off. And so I was quite bored. And then I was a big surfer. I loved surfing. And we had our holiday, a vacation, 2-week vacation. Me and my mates went down to Newquay. A lot of Americans don't realize this, but UK is part of the World Surf League Tour. They actually stop in UK, when they go around the world. They go to south of France, to Biarritz or Hossegor, and then they go to Newquay.
Yeah.
We have some surf there as well. And so went down there with my friends, and I met this guy in the water. He was from Norway. He was a silver surface waiter, and he was telling me that he was earning £30 a day. He was getting free food, and he was just basically surfing all day. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like the life. So my dad picked my friends up. I wasn't there. Again, no mobile phones at this point in night. And 6 months later, he came looking for me. And he found me working in a surf shop. I'd finished silver service waiter and managed to get a job in a local surf shop. And I was enjoying life. I was just spending time in the water. I didn't really have any ambitions of doing higher education. And then, he took me home from there and, very, very stoic. And he's in my ear. It's a 4-hour drive and it's quite a long drive. You've wasted your education. What are you going to now do with your life? And to be a fireman, you had to be minimum age of 18. So I still hadn't even met the threshold of that. In 93, 94, we had a huge recession. So just for one firefighter's job in our area, there was 2,000 applicants. And so I wasn't going to get in as a young 18-year-old. And I thought, well, if I join the military, I can get that fitness and get that discipline. A lot of veterans, that is a transition for them. They go to the fire, law enforcement or blue light service. And I said to my dad, I was going to join the military. He told me I'd last 2 minutes. That was his response. I was like, okay. But I didn't, no point in me arguing with my father all the way back for 4 hours. It's going to be a long journey. And I thought, well, the best course of action is action. And I've done that throughout. I never listened to the naysayers or those who say you can't do it. The best thing you do is go do it and then just come back to the table. And they won't be sat there. They'll be somewhere else. And so that's what I did. I joined the army at the age of 17 and a half. And again, I thought do 3 years, get what I needed and then leave. And then, I never looked back. As soon as my foot was in the door, I fell in love with the military, what it offered me and the guys around me, and then just went straight forward.
That's wild. I'm so curious because, lots of people have parents that split up and don't end up together. Some parents, it's a disaster. Some people, they amicably split and everything's okay and they co-parent really well. How was it kind of dealing with that as a young kid watching? I'm assuming, did your dad know your mom was going to pick you up and take you away with all the kids and then fight for you to get back? Like, how was that environment? And then you're put into kind of violence right away and protecting yourself. How does that, I think of like the stuff I went through as a teenager, and you either get like really rebellious, like the party life seems really good, or you start kind of picking up some different coping mechanisms that may or may not be super healthy. But what was like that time for you?
I think for me, I didn't have any warning signs that we were going to be leaving. I heard my parents argue. I didn't, not to that extent that my mum would leave. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I was fighting from a young age. So I wasn't rebellious. It was literally just a defense mechanism because, we people were attracted to us because we were the wrong color of skin. And we were victims of racism, basically. And
Right.
so, it was either fight or just get bullied every day. And so I fought back and, but then when my father then got custody of me and my sisters, when we moved back to Aldershot, he'd finished his career in the military. He'd done it now his 22 years. And so we left Aldershot, that military environment, and moved to a little village in the country. And then I went to another school. So everything that happened in the past was in the past, if that made sense. I now almost had like a fresh start. None of the kids I was in school with knew anyone in the military. No one knew about my life before. And so I always say that was the time that I could actually be a child, from probably about 11 to 15, 16. That's when, life sort of eased. When we talk about co-parenting, there was none of that at all. I didn't see my mum, very rarely see my mum once a year. You may have heard Alana's story with her mother passing when she was young. And I They sort of emphasize that to her. But yeah, she died when you're 15, but you saw in your mum more than I have, and she's still here.
Yeah, it's so interesting how like the impact of those happen, and it's interesting from a young age you kind of were able to see that sort of move as a fresh start versus like none of the baggage from prior was coming with you in a way that was going to kind of catapult or make that environment kind of almost unsafe for you where you were. And so you went in, you're going to prove your dad wrong that you're going to last longer than a few months. So talk to me about what that process was like and kind of entering into that world and the
Yeah,
training and structure.
when I joined, I was like 67 kilos. So I worked out my maths, 140, about 150, just shy of 150 pounds and 5'7". So I could probably see where he was coming from when he was like, your last 2 minutes, because I wasn't the 200-pound guy in front of you at the moment. So I went in with no aspirations at all of any special forces or anything like that. You know, my dad, he was in the Royal Engineers, and my father was I always relate to him as the Ted Lasso of the army. Yeah, he was actually British Army soccer manager, player, and coach. So his
No
career,
way.
yeah, his career, and I now I've seen Ted Lasso is nothing like my father. So his career was based around his sporting attributes, and so I would very rarely see him in a uniform. It's normally he's in a tracksuit, he's in his shorts, his shirts, and he's taking guys training. So I never really had an understanding of the military or the infrastructure of the military, the special forces, the SAS, the SBS, parachute regiment, and the commando, any of that. It was football. And he told me to join the Royal Engineers so I can get a trade and then leave. Get what you can from the military, not the other way around. And so, yeah, I went in with those sort of eyes. And then when I was in, I was seeing guys with different color berets. There was maroon berets for the airborne, there was green for the commando. I went through basic training. I did well in basic training. I was in the top 25, and then went to the next phase of training. But each time I went to the next phase, physically I was getting stronger, but mentally I was getting stronger as well. And within 18 months, I was just shy of 180 pounds. I put on 30 pounds and grown 4 inches in height. And then I realized I'm actually no longer in the top 25%. I'm in the top 5. And so I went to, my first posting was Germany, because they didn't realize that the Stott's actually it's not a popular surname, as in it's not a popular surname. It's not like Smith or Jones or what you get. And so a lot of people are like, oh, Stott. And there's a lot of family stuff in the military. And they're like, you Dave Stott's son? I said, yeah. And they're like, that's it. As soon as they realized that they'd sent me to Germany to play football, soccer, like my dad, because they were the army soccer champions. So I spent a year in Germany, which was great. As a young 18-year-old, I'm now in Germany playing soccer, getting paid to play soccer, basically. And I sort of joke because the Royal Engineers, we have a famous soccer cup called the FA Cup. It's like the Super Bowl. Well, the Royal Engineers were the first winners of the FA Cup a couple 100 years ago. So I sort of played for a team that won the FA Cup. But I enjoyed that sort of life. But then I sat down and realized I was actually carrying on in the same path as I was just following my father's footsteps, and I didn't want to do that. And so I volunteered for the Commando course, which is a Tier 2 Special Forces unit, and flew back to UK, did that, and then that opened up this whole new career for me. I spent a lot of time with them. I spent 8 years with Brigade Reconnaissance Force. I was an instructor on the Commando course. We were going away on tours, we were going away on exercises. I was loving life, and the idea of me being a fireman is long gone now. That
Boring now.
yeah, that's in my periphery. But I could see that my career was, not only did I go commandos at a young age, I then went to Commando Reconnaissance, which is their elite part of their unit. And the only next stage or last stage for you is Tier 1 Special Forces. So in the US, you have the SEALs, you have the Rangers, you have the Green Berets. Their class is Tier 2. And then you have an elite unit or a specialist unit, special mission unit, as you call them, which is SEAL Team 6 in Delta Force, which is an additional selection process. And we have the SAS and the SBS in the UK. And so, yeah, my career had pretty much funneled that. The only real progression from there, and I'd seen guys come back, and some guys pass, some guys fail. Let's go for it. Let's go for Tier 1 Special Forces.
Now, the curiosity, I know that there's the selection criteria, and I feel like probably kind of like almost in a company situation, there's always people kind of spotting, your top performers, or like, there's something that's different about this one, or like, let's just see how he does in this situation. So is it anybody can kind of like, hey, I want to give myself a shot? Are you invited to kind of try out for that next tier, or sort of what is the level in which the mechanisms get
Yeah.
kind of triggered?
I'll explain it because UK is a little bit different. Than I've only just realised this recently that SEAL Team 6 you have to be invited,
Mm,
which is interesting because I think they're losing a lot of potential talent because they're going on what's on paper. And the
right.
reason for that, I'll explain. So, Tier 2 Special Forces, the best way to explain that sort of training is what you see on TV, buds, when they're all running around and they've got the boat above their head and they're in the sand and they're all crawling around together and they're getting
Yeah,
shouted.
ring the bell, ring the bell. Yeah.
Yeah, ring the bell. They're getting shouted at. But what they're trying to do there, they're testing them physically and mentally. But
Yeah.
what they're trying to do is get them to work together as a team, have that cohesion, so that they know that these guys are team players. There's no individuals; they're team players. And so that's Tier 2 Special Forces. You get shouted at, and the good thing about that for some students is they know where they're at. Some of them like feedback. They like to know, some of them get praise, some of them get shouted at. That's Tier 2 Special Forces. Tier 1 Special Forces, which is 6 months, which is even longer, you don't even get shouted at.
Mm,
You don't get shouted at once. And the reason for that is because the difference between Tier 2 and Tier 1, you have to be self-motivated. There's not going to be an instructor on the battlefield or when you're running behind enemy lines on your own on an escape and evasion to tell you that you're doing well or to keep up. You
yeah.
have to be self-motivated. And some people don't like that. Some people also don't like zero feedback because they're like, well, how am I doing? How am I not doing? Am I doing good or not? So, yeah, that's the big difference between the two. And Tier 1 Special Forces is the course is that hard itself. They don't need to shout. It's that difficult anyway. And it is a whole selection process. And there's a great book, actually. He's a SEAL Team 6 officer, a guy called Rich Davini. He wrote a book called Attributes. And this
Okay.
is where I think SEAL Team 6 need to open up for voluntary, because for SEAL Team 6, you'd be invited, and they would invite all the rock stars. These guys on paper, they're
Yep.
top of the class, they are great operators. And then they were still coming through and they were still having, like, we have a 95% attrition rate on ours in the UK, and they have the same. I started with 200 and we finished with 8. And that's about normal with 2 courses a year. And they were having the same. And they were like, well, these guys are great on paper. What is it that's wrong? And one example, I won't go through them all, but one example is because they're at the top of the class, they're used to being the one at the front. They've now come across another 100 rock stars who are always
Equal playing field. Yeah.
equal playing field. And, all of a sudden, oh, no, I'm not. I'm in the middle of the class or I'm in the bottom third. So how do they deal with failure? Do they pick themselves up, or do they just throw their dummy out the pram or the buggy and then just voluntarily withdraw? And a lot of them do that as well. So,
Yeah.
so that's why I think they should open up to non-invite, because they'll be pleasantly surprised. But I remember my chief instructor in our selection on day 1, we're in this small dining area, all crammed in this wooden building in the middle of Wales. And he said, look around the room. And you look around the room and you start analyzing the room, you're making your own judgments or assessments of individuals. Some guys are like, monsters, and then some guys are quite nimble and think is that guy even old enough to be here? Those sort of things. But then when you fast forward 6 months later, he does it again, and you're in that room, and it's not the people you thought it was. Hollywood doesn't help matters with Dwayne Johnson, Jason Statham. I call it the biceps, the bullets, and the bombs. That doesn't look like anyone in Tier 1 Special Forces.
Yeah, I think that was one of my most surprising moments because, again, you get so used to what apparently the stereotype is you're going to be meeting. And then to see guys who are very unassuming and what would be maybe quote unquote considered small or slighter build, and not exactly these big kind of Hulkamanias you see that look like they kind of destroy. And then you kind of start to understand more what they have to do. I'm like, oh, yeah, there's no way that if you're 275 and 6'6", that particular mission is going to be super easy for you, or you would be stuck just because of the weight, I would imagine, in some circumstances, not all. But I also find it really interesting about what you're talking about in terms of equal playing field and meeting somebody who's just as good as you. And so now, do you figure out how to work together, or does it drive you even more to get that next level of impossible is a possible skill set? And I think it also comes where I see a lot in sort of corporate hiring processes. Everybody's always looking for resilience and grit, and people, coming out of, special forces are very attractive to entrepreneurs because of everything that they've gone through. But also the kind of always X factors. How do you really test for that, right? Again, you have the good on paper candidate, and then you have somebody who doesn't look as good, but actually has the traits that you want, just hasn't been given the opportunity yet. So it's interesting that kind of it seems the UK sort of has that mindset versus the US kind of more that still that hand selection. You are the rock stars, and we're only picking kind of the rock stars to sort of let you into that group.
Yeah, well, I think, one of the things I've been looking into, so the UK we're the oldest special forces unit in the world. So we've learned from that. And so
Yeah.
that's still Team 6. Delta Force is probably different. It's a volunteer thing. And so it's just, they don't have a shortage of volunteers for the SEAL Team 6. Just to put it in context, we only have in the SBS 250 people and the SAS 300. We're not big units. So we need
Yeah.
those volunteers. If we're then handpicking and then we get it wrong,
Right.
it's almost like you want to give everyone an opportunity, give everyone an opportunity, and you get two lives. And so, they give them opportunity, and then, you'll be pleasantly surprised. Interesting enough, though, like what you were saying about the 275-pound guys and things like that. When people see me, they're like, what is it you press? And I say, I don't press anything. I've never done weights before in my life. I never do weights. Yeah, I don't, because in the military, they only test you on body weight. They only test you
Oh.
on pull-ups, on press-ups, on dips, how fast you can
Yep.
run, how fast you can move with a pack across, 30, 40 miles. They don't test you how much you can bench press or how heavy the kettlebells are. And so I learned that quick early on in the military. And then I thought, well, for me to be top of the class, I need to be very good at body weight stuff. And so I would make sure that I was at that stage. But I remember when I was in Kosovo in 1999, and I remember going into the gym, and first time I met the US Marine Corps. And these guys were like Hollywood stars. You could see they had like 8-packs, 6-packs, they had everything. They were huge. And like mates walk by like sheepishly, like just trying to, going on to the rowing machine or the bike or something. And but I remember they deployed with us on a small operation, and they were too big for the job. They couldn't roll. They couldn't climb the rope into the helicopter because they're too big. Some of them couldn't get a kit. So I was like, okay. So once I seen that, then I decided, right, it's about being fit enough to pass the courses, but also being able to perform your role in that job. When we're going alongside a moving ship at night with a small caving ladder like that, and you've got to climb it, and you got all your kit on there, or you're diving onto an oil rig. There's no room for big muscles.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I find that so fascinating. Or you just look at what gets kind of, and again, it's the kitschy thing or what's marketable and what people kind of go after. But it's so funny. It was really eye-opening once you got to talk to people who are actually like in those worlds and what it actually takes versus what people walk around thinking or what Hollywood has glamorized in terms of, what they should look like or all the ridiculousness that kind of surrounds it. So you found your passion. You loved doing everything. The training spoke to you. You keep going higher and higher in the ranks. Now you're at the top. And how does, I guess, for you, is this is all I'm going to ever do? Or was there going to be a point where I guess maybe a mission came, you're like, okay, like I just got out by the hair of my skin on that one. Maybe I want to slow down or look at something different. How did it all work for you?
No, I'd never had any aspirations of leaving the military at all. What interesting when you say you got to the top, when you pass selection, after that 6 months, they give you a berry and belt. You hit the ground with a thud because you then turn up to camp and you're like the new boy getting the coffee and the tea on, So it's really interesting, which is great because it levels any ego. It's like, no,
Yeah.
we're just now in. But when I joined, I was like, I looked around the room and I was operating with these guys, and I was with like-minded individuals who had that same drive and passion and believed that anything was possible. So for me, I was like, I'm going nowhere. I know this is me now. This is me till I retire. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I was just about to deploy on another trip to Afghanistan. And about 2 weeks before the tour, we were out in Oman in the desert doing some pre-deployment training. And I was doing what's called a halo jump. It's high altitude, high opening. So halo is skydiving. So you're
Right.
free from the planes. Hey-ho, you're actually still attached. The parachute, as you exit the aircraft, is still attached and it will open it for you.
Oh.
You jump out at 15,000 feet. It's like that's the limits before you can go on oxygen any higher. And the parachute opens. I mean, you can travel up to 30 minutes or 50 kilometers, depending if the winds are right, to a target
Area.
area. So we'd done done these on operational jumps before. We had some new guys come through on selection, and so they wanted to jump, and they, to do some fun jumps. And the thing about the military, they take great sports like diving, skiing, and parachuting, and never make it fun. You know what I mean? There's not fun in the military. And I think it was my third exit of the day. And as I exit the tailgate, I was supposed to be looking forward at the canopies in front of me. Instead, I'm now looking at my foot, which is caught in the line above my head. So I'm frantically trying to clear my leg in time because I know that this parachute's just about to go taut. I couldn't clear it, and my leg got pulled over my head and to the right. But thankfully, my heel did clear. Otherwise, I wouldn't be chatting to you now. I would have just bled out in the air. So straight away, I knew there was a problem. I never experienced pain like that before. And I was vomiting because of the pain. And because of the air so still quite thin, I was drifting consciousness.
Oh my God.
When I was coming to, I could see at first I had a canopy, which is the main issue, and I was heading in the right direction. But we had communications, but there's no point in me telling them that I had an issue because there's nothing anyone can do till you land anyway. So my first course of action was to try and land this safely, and I only have one leg. So I landed it one-legged. It was a good landing.
Wow.
And, yeah, thankfully. And I got shipped off to the MRI scan in Muscat and, came back, and I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus in my knee, my hamstring, my calf, and my quadriceps. So all the muscles in the leg as well. Everything, because you can tear ACLs, cruciate ligaments, and as long as you've got a good muscle structure on your quads and your hamstring, it will support it. Rugby players do it all the time, but that had all gone as well. There was no muscle support at all. So it was just a spiral of errors. Then there was the Icelandic volcano, so I couldn't fly home for 4 weeks. I then got sent home for 6 weeks. They lost scans. It was but my unit now are in Afghanistan, so you're sort of like, again, you're in their rear view mirror. They've got other more important things to think about. So
they gotta move on.
Yeah. So I had no aspirations of leaving. Alana was 8 months pregnant when I left. So, my worry was, how am I going to support my new family? Is there any work out there? I hadn't had a transition period. I'd literally, you're going. So I was going through an identity crisis. I got to where I was in the special forces because of my physical robustness. I now couldn't even run 50 meters without my knee just giving way completely. Yeah, buckling. But when you're in the military, we knew what we were doing day in, day out for the next 2 years. That's a great thing I loved about that. They kept you busy. There was never a time that you weren't doing anything. And if you ever had a course get cancelled, they would fill it with someone else. They get money's worth out of you, which I like. I like to be busy. And, and now I'm like, what is my role? Where do I now fit in society?
Did you jump right away to what comes next? Or did you, I'll call it wallow for lack of better word, in terms of, oh no, this is over. This is it. Like, this is done. Like, just sit there and just like, were you in the pity party for a while when you were like, this sucks? Like,
I didn't have time to wallow because Alana was pregnant. We had to put income in, without sounding like Liam Neeson. With my particular skill sets, the private security industry is an easy transition.
Of course, yeah.
When I got out, it was May 2011. So it was now the Arab Spring in Middle East, North Africa. And so a friend of mine rang me and said, I got to get 40 guys into Benghazi, help set up this whole project with the British Embassy. He said, can you go in and lead it for me? And I was like, perfect. So within 48 hours of leaving the military, I'm on my first job in North Africa. So that sort of eased that pressure a bit in the fact that I knew, I could bring in some income. And then 2 weeks later, I flew back. Alana gave birth to Molly. And again, that was another indicator, because if that was the military, you wouldn't have been flown home. Mission is the priority, where I now realize I'm in a different environment. And but when I was during those 2 weeks, I never name and shame, we'll come the big five, biggest security companies in the world, were all gathered in this hotel. We're in Benghazi, Gaddafi's in Tripoli, the city's been surrounded. And so at any point that's going to fall. So we had oil and gas, we had NGOs, we had, all sorts, media, all in this hotel. And I was listening to these security companies, and they were charging 6-7 figure sums for crisis management and evacuation plans, which weren't actually in place. And so when I flew home, I said to Lana, I said, look, I want to find a niche within the industry. A lot of my friends from the Special Boat Service had their own anti-piracy companies, because 2011, it was the height of the Somalian piracy as well. I didn't want to be sort of like competing with those guys. And I said, Lana, I might have an idea. I know it was about evacuation. So it's a huge proliferation of weapons at this time in Libya. And the Libyans didn't want Libya being another Afghanistan and Iraq. Once Gaddafi had fallen, they wanted to take control of their country. They didn't want Westerns walking around with weapons. So I knew that I only had a short window. So I bought 30 weapons on the black market and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt. Communications kits in there, put money in there, stuff we do in the military. Just spent a month in the desert designing these plans. Went back to Aberdeen. Sorry, yeah, we lived in Aberdeen, which is the oil and gas capital of Europe. So it's like Houston. So I had access to some oil and gas companies, more the subsidiary companies. And I sold this container to them, hopefully never needing to use it. And then, lucky for me with Alana, she didn't put me under pressure that we needed guaranteed income each month. She's
Yeah.
very, as you know, she's very entrepreneurial. She
Yeah.
saw the bigger picture. She'd also trained and done close protection, surveillance and things like that. And then obviously found out she was pregnant with Molly back in the day. So
Yeah.
this whole vision of Mr. and Mrs. Smith didn't really happen. But it was good for me because every time I was out or new inquiries came in, Alana could deal with it,
Yeah.
understand the security process. It wasn't uncommon for me to fly back in the morning on one flight. Alana give me another passport, another missions deck, and then I'm gone again in the afternoon. That was quite
Yeah.
normal.
And that's what I think that's really interesting that I want to make sure we touch on because it's a very unique partnership and I love it. And I think that, from my experience, a lot of other people who have a partner that is in military, they come back or an injury happens and it's not like, let's move on and everything. I can pick myself back up again. It can be very dark. It can be very twisty. You might have a partner that is not very supportive or has been trying to get you out of where you want to go. And I think, did you always know since you started being together that like that was rock solid? Like you just had that partnership who got it. Like she's never going to pull me out of what I love to do. And then you have an injury. And rather than like, okay, stay put, go get a 9 to 5, like let's just make life easy. She's like, okay, let's like, yeah.
I think I always feel for Alana because she met me when I was at my height. She met me when I was at my best. That's when she fell in love with me and things like that. And then 9 months later, she then sees me at my worst. And for me, when Alana saw that as well and put everything on hold to help build me up. The hardest thing for Alana to get through to me is for me to understand my abilities and worth. Because I was like, well, there's other special forces guys that do this, and Lana could see something in me that she goes, yeah, but I don't mean they can do that. And I wasn't having it. I said, no, these guys could have done. She goes, no, you're different. You are different from such and such. You're different from him. And that took a while for me to believe that. She saw it before I did. Yeah. So obviously that was a key part in it. But yeah, it wasn't the fact that, there was dark times and Alana sort of picked me up, but when I tell people I'm in the security and she because of the way I look, I think I'm a doorman from the local nightclub. But yeah, the security industry is very diverse, surveillance, close protection, coaching and mentoring. And so for me, well, like I said, Alana didn't put me under pressure. So each time I had a phone call, it was a different country, it was a different mission. And then I was actually learning so much about this whole security sector. Because when you are in the military, they will only show you what you need to see. It's very linear. Is that right? This is your mission. Don't worry about anything else.
Yeah, not your problem. Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry about any of that. Whereas now I'm seeing everything else that's going on, really understanding sort of the ground troops as well. And so, yeah, it was great because I was just doing different jobs. Example, like one phone call would be, could you take the UAE royal family's super yacht from Barcelona to Maldives? I was like, yeah, of course. It's beautiful. And then the next one, I put together a team and we're training the Kurdish special forces to fight ISIS. It's very, very different. And interesting enough about the security industry, the risk reward ratio isn't balanced at all. There's guys doing more risky jobs in Afghan and Iraq on a fraction of money that the guys are working in 5-star hotels with corporates. And so that's where I was at. Well, I'm going to go for minimum risk and maximum reward. And I just finished the London Olympics in 2012. Nice 6 weeks in London, 5-star hotels, all the tickets of the games with with Visa, which was the main sponsor. And then I find myself out in Benghazi. I always find when I do a really good task, I hit the ground.
Gotta equalize it out. You've had good. Now we're just gonna get back to basics here.
I'm sure it's Alana just leveling it. So I was out in Benghazi and it was September 11th, 2012. And that's an important date. Some listeners will know, is when your American ambassador got killed in Benghazi. And So I was there that night and I was asked to activate my evacuation plan. This is the first time we'd done it. So I ended up taking a German oil company, their engineers, from Benghazi back to Tripoli through safe houses I had over a 36-hour period. And, they made that movie 13 hours, but, our night was completely different from theirs. When I went in, we didn't even know what was going on because it was still unfolding. And so, I got them back safely to Tripoli through safe houses. That you could take the coastal road, which is about 8-hour drive. But the problem with Libya, you have 167 tribes. The issue wouldn't have been me and the German engineers. The issue would have been the drivers that we had. And so I had to factor that. That's why we went to a safe house and waited for drivers to come in from Tripoli, which obviously the German engineers were getting frustrated, but they just didn't understand the politics, the demographics, and the tribal influence. And so because of the success of that, 2 years later, I'm in Brazil at the Soccer World Cup with Visa again, enjoying the 5-star life. And I get a phone call from the Canadian embassy saying your name keeps coming up. We're stuck here in Tripoli. It's now the Tripoli War, which is a civil war between the militia and the government. And they're like, can you help us? So I flew back in and me and my fixer, we single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy, 18 minutes, 4 diplomats. And the reason for that is their teams would rotate every 4 months. The airport was now burnt down, so their exit point was gone. But at no time during any of those teams had any of them decided to drive out of the city and have a look at the routes, any other routes. And so
interesting.
Yeah. So when it came to we've never been out of the city, I was like, okay, well, that's a bit of an error on your side, but it's a bonus.
Yeah, seems like I'm no expert, but that seems not like a logical thing to do. Yeah.
It's quite basic, yeah. But but interesting. So they had their diplomatic cars, which was fine, so we can get them out. Their issue was they were worried about it was about a 100-kilometer road from Tripoli to the border, Tunis, and my fixer, he's from that area, which is great because that then helps us in those regions. And the British embassy the week before had left and drove through all the checkpoints and got shot at. So the Canadians were worried about that. So me and my fixer, we went out and we didn't speak to the guys in the gates with the guns. We actually spoke to the elders. And we sat down and we shared bread, shared coffee, and it literally was just full transparency. Just being and showing them full transparency, respect, and communication. Like, this is who we are. This is what we plan to do. This is the day we're going to do it. Yeah, we had to part a few $100s, which is fine, of course. But you go buy all your guards some burger and fries. Whatever you wanted to spend it on. So
it was to pay to get out. Yeah.
But on the morning when we then left, these guys who had normally shot, they escorted us through that town. And so I was always trying to think outside the box. They had 6 diplomatic vehicles, but they had so much more equipment, sensitive equipment as well. And they're like, well, how are we going to get this out? This needs to come with us. And so Tripoli is a big fishing port, and every day the fish wagons go from Tripoli to Tunis along that road, drop off fresh fish. But because they do that route all the time, they don't get stopped at the border. And so that's what I did. I put all their kit in 2 fish wagons. And they're like, really? I was like, yeah, in the fish wagon. And it did. It went straight through. So, it sounds very sexy, sounds very Hollywood, but actually, again, no weapons were used. It's just really understanding that tribal influences and just more of an intelligence picture.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating sometimes, like what undoubtedly in some situations is a very complex issue or problem, but in this situation to get people out safely or create a plan, the basis of it was transparency and communication, which you kind of replicate that across a lot of people's problems, the largest problems. Like, if we started being a little bit more transparent in general and communicate better, would we always be in this big of a mess? And for certain situations, obviously, that sometimes that's out the window. But I think it's as I think about entrepreneurs that I work with or any of the issues, it's always something simple, but because basic principles have been missed, it's now a 10x bigger issue than it needs to be. So I imagine that kind of pops up a lot of the times with you. And I'm curious now, at what point does the Netflix opportunity come up to do World's Toughest Forces?
That was a while. So when I came back from the Canadian embassy, Alana had sat me down and my normal sort of standard operational procedure is she would launder my clothes and then I'd charge my phone and we get ready for the next phone call, really. And one of my shirts was covered in blood. I administered first aid on the border. It was a road traffic collision. It wasn't my blood. And, I explained to Lana, she knew anyway, we just evacuated the whole of the Canadian embassy. And she goes, have you heard yourself? She goes, have you heard yourself? It's like a throwaway comment. It was almost like, and then she sat me down. My dad died that year as well. I literally buried my dad and flew away that afternoon. I was so fixated on work. I disconnected from society. I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. And so something had to change. So we sat down, 2 bottles of wine, bottle of port, and just thrashed it through the night and just communicated. And really, I thought Alana wanted me to go to be bringing in the money. And she thought I wanted to go away because I was an adrenaline junkie. And that wasn't the case. It was just a lack of communication. So chapter 17 in my book is called Dead or Divorce. That's the conversation Alana and I are having at this point. And so I decided I'd take a sabbatical, from that. I didn't need to be taking these risks. But my injured leg now was 2 kilos lighter than my good leg because of the muscle wastage. And so I just bought a push bike off Amazon, just cycled to and from the office, about 8 miles there, 8 miles back. And you've heard some of my backstory now. You can imagine me sat in these architects and planners meetings with Alana. She's doing very well, very successful property development business. And here I am. When we now have our second child, Tommy, and I'm sat in the corner, bottle feeding and just bored. And Alana,
yeah, I was about to say, I can imagine that's a sad picture for you.
Yeah, so Alana could see, right, this guy needs to do something. So
yeah,
it was about a month before my 40th birthday. I said, well, I always fancy doing a world record. And she said, what in? I said, well, cycling's good because it's not hurting my knee. And so I joked that Alana clearly wanted me out of the house at this point because she then found the world's longest road, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska, 14,000 miles over 14 countries and 2 continents. And so it sounds, I never mean to sound arrogant, but it might sound it to maybe some cyclists out there. I'd never only cycled 20 miles, then I applied for the world record at the age of 40. Guinness came back and said, you've been successful in your application. So yeah, I started training. Alana and I worked a lot in the philanthropic space, me especially around veterans, Alana in human trafficking. So I rang a good friend of mine, Prince Harry, and him and his brother and Kate were just about to launch this mental health campaign called Heads Together. And I'd seen mental health within the military, but not like firsthand, but I hadn't seen it throughout the whole of society, postnatal depression, young children, teenagers. So yeah, we got introduced to Royal Foundation, I set a target of £1 million. I trained for 15 months. The world record was 117 days. I did it in 99 days, became the first man in history to do it under 100 days, taking 2 world records. And more impressively, Alana raising about $1.3 million for the mental health.
Love it.
So this goes back to your question on Netflix.
Yeah.
This period in my life where it's gone from special forces, doing very dangerous missions to this guy's now got a book, he's on TV, guest speaks. What was that?
Yeah.
Where was that leap? And it was because of the success of that bike ride. It then, everyone was like, well, who's this guy? Sometimes known as Prince Harry's special forces friend, which is great because I've been called a lot worse in my life.
Yeah, worse people to be associated with. Yeah.
So that was the case. That was where it sort of took us to that stage. We never left the security industry. Actually, I was chatting to one of the station CIA guys recently, and he's like, I've just Googled you. I said, don't Google me. I said, you'll see what the world sees. So I always say there's 2 Dean Stotts. There's the one that, on social media, the bike ride, the guest speaking, representing brands, the Netflix show. But 75% of what
highlight reel. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's 75% of the world who doesn't know exactly what we do behind the scenes. And that became apparent in Israel recently. So when we moved over from America, because of we assisted with the Afghan pullouts from here, just literally doing a lot of paperwork and joining dots and connecting people. So we assisted getting over 1,200 Americans out on that, which was great. So then when Israel happened, Alana and I were in Disneyland on October the 7th when it kicked off in Club 33 or something. It's like
the Disney Club. Yeah.
Yeah, like a private members club. We're not members. Our friends invited us. So it was adults only event. And so we're there. And my phone started to heat up. And then the next morning, a friend of mine messaged me. His auntie and uncle were on a tour in Bethlehem. And he was concerned. Ilana's watching the news and she's like, I think you need to go out. The difference between Israel compared to the likes of Libya and Afghanistan, I'd never been there before. I never had any infrastructure. But what I've done is I've done many evacuations before. And so went in and reverse engineered it, did it the other way around. Yeah. And we ended up getting 220 Americans out. But unlike the other missions where I already have clients, so I know who I'm getting, I don't need to let anyone know I was there. When I left LAX, we didn't know who we were getting. Dean was just going to fly. We'll work it from there. By the time I landed, Alana had 63 WhatsApp groups, 63 families who needed assistance. And so we helped in that. We were getting people across the border to Jordan because I'd actually just been filming the Netflix in Jordan. So I knew it was a safe haven. We were planning routes to Cyprus by boats. And then Alana was dealing with the chartered aircraft. So I ended up doing some social media posts to say, look, I'm in Jerusalem, I'm in Israel. If anyone's struggling or anyone can't get hold of their family, let me know. And, big podcasters, Jack Carr, Jocko Willink, Sean Ryan, they all shared it. And interesting enough, there was a Bible college, and the husband and the wife and his pastor from Huntington Beach, and they lived there 8 years, and they had 15 students, 14 American and 1 Indian. And it exhausted all their options to get them out. They couldn't get them on flights. And so they were under a lot of pressure from the families. You're in charge of our children, get them home safe. So Elizabeth, she's a big fan of Jocko. She prayed, she said, and then she picked up her phone and said, wonder what Jocko would do. And then there I was on one of his stories. And so she messaged me. Within 45 minutes, I was walking into the oldest Protestant church in the world in Jerusalem and sat down with her and her husband. And then 48 hours later, we got all those kids out safe at no cost as well. And the reason I mention that is because I saw the good and bad in social media.
Of course.
A good story. But where I go to on that is a lot of people message me like, oh, so you're back in the security industry. I was like, I'd never left the security industry.
Yeah, it just wasn't on my highlight reel on Instagram. Yeah.
Because of the sensitivity of the work that we do and the clients that we represent, it's not. It's
just not safe. Yeah.
It's not the place to do it. Yeah. So I'd never left that space. And Alana is still in that space now. But then, the Netflix show that I got a phone call, what is it now? Just over 3 years ago it was. No, about 4 years ago. We'd come over not long after COVID. And they said, oh, we're looking at doing this show. We'd like to put Dean's name forward. And the reason they found me was when I did my bike ride, Harry and I did a promo video together to really catapult the project and gain interest. And we were filming at Kensington Palace, and one of the girls who was on that team there was now working for this production company. They had a show called Inside World's Toughest Prisons, 7 seasons. Yeah, so it's
I watched all of it. Yeah.
So they wanted to do a spin-off like Inside World's Toughest Forces. That was the original name. And so they said they wanted special forces candidates. So she always remembered me, reached out to Alana, and then a year later she said, oh, we've gone from 150 candidates to Dean. And I was like, well, that's strange because I haven't done any TV yet, and so what's the premise of the show? And they said, well, you look like you're the fittest. And so it's like you're going to be doing selection 8 times over. I was like, okay. So yeah, I mean, Netflix kicked back and said, oh, we were thinking more of an American, host. And then thankfully for me, the British production company, no, Dean's your guy. And then so we had to go to Dallas, do a chemistry test with a few Americans. That's where we picked up the seal. And then at the 11th hour, so the guy who commissioned Top Gear. So it's like Top Gear with gun show, but can't call it Top Gun. And the, he's like, it doesn't work with 2. You have to have a full guy. And so right at the 11th hour, this guy comes in. We ended up interviewing him or speaking to him on Zoom. But he's a young guy, he did 4 years in the Rangers, obviously service-wise didn't do as long as me and the SEAL, but he's a podcast, he's a YouTuber. So very confident in front of the camera, I mean, anytime the camera comes in front of me, I'd like it from the side, and I was like, how's this going to work? He had a nose ring in. I was like, what's his pop? It's like totally the opposite of what I thought would, but actually when we then filmed it, the dynamics worked really well because yes, he is that confident person who's happy to talk in front of the camera when I'm probably not. So I'm like the grumpy Jeremy Clarkson, and
Well, I thought they did a good job of like personality types. So I think coming back to stereotypes, I think the SEAL was exactly what we were talking about of like a American kind of poster boy, good looking, got the hair, like bigger guy, and kind of like thriving off like I'm a SEAL environment, and then you're kind of the more like just like calm, cool, like humble, collected, and then like different. Yeah, I think it worked out well. It was cool to watch.
he never got invited to SEAL Team 6 anyway, so clearly. But,
He didn't. I thought he did.
No, it was interesting because I was like, because now I know TV, they're like, me and production would clash all the time because they're like, right,
Yeah.
you need to be funny. And I used to say to the guys, what is it? What is this? Is this a comedy or is this a reality? But Ryan the Seal would play up to that, which actually backfired on him. It didn't go down well with me. And so for me, I didn't want to, I remember we were filming and they're like, well, 99, because I was like, let's do it properly. Let's go through. And they're like,
Yeah.
well, no, we can cut that. And I was like, I said, no. And I said, let's just do it properly. And then it's done. And then you've got it at least. And they're like, well, 99% of the audience won't even know. And I'm like, I said, I don't care about 99% of the audience. I said, I care about a certain group of guys who are going to watch this. And I said,
Yeah.
if you get it right and they like this show, then that 99% will like it as well. I'm so glad I was a stubborn ox and then stuck to my guns and I didn't do the comedy sketch and thing. Cause I'm like, these guys come and go, they'll film them and they'll go. It's like your reputation's on the line here. And so, yeah, I know like the young guy, Cameron, he did really well. Ryan, I think might be kicking himself a bit.
Well, and I think that's important too, because I was curious too, especially in those situations. Yeah, obviously you want to, get audience engagement, but also the teams and the operations in which you do to kind of dishonor it or make it laughable in some kind of way or kind of cheat it. Like to me, that just from like an integrity perspective, like doesn't do it justice. And as somebody who, that's not going to be my career path, but I love like the detail, the like structure, the peer, like all of it to like really look at things like I could never do that. Or like, that's so cool that people are able to show up and train in this way to protect people like all the time, all over the world.
Yeah, no, I think you have to be authentic. It has to have the authenticity. Otherwise, the audience will see through that. Obviously, when we were filming, I didn't know what the final cut would look, and now I've seen it. Hang on, they've only shown 25% of what we filmed. We filmed so much because, and I get it how they cut things and make things look like. So,
Package it, yeah.
probably will be a little bit more relaxed, but I didn't want to take that risk. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it was a great show. It worked well, and it was to showcase what was unique about all the units around the world. Whether we're in Sweden in the Arctic or whether in the desert in Jordan, it had a bit of everything. And
Yeah.
I'd do it again in a heartbeat, even with Ryan and Cameron again.
Yeah. I think it was really cool. And also just being like from and born in Canada, the like serving is just not as front and center as it is in America or other places. And I think like growing up, and like I love operations and the stuff that, like Alana supports with you. I'm like, that's my skill set to be able to go in MacGyver and like connect people, collaborate, structure plans, make things happen. I don't know that I'd be necessarily the one jumping off planes and doing all the things, but I think even just, I guess, from a recruitment perspective, it's a great tool for people to get exposure and see because it's had that maybe been an option or somebody educating younger, like I think I'd been like, okay, well, what could I do if I was to go down this path and what levels? Again, coming down to a skill set or trait perspective outside of, going to university. I was never the academic one. I know it's like, but I've got street smarts and I can figure it out and ask questions. And that's what me and Alana geeked out. I'm like, we have very similar like styles. We'll just go out and figure it out. We've got no ego. Like we don't mind looking stupid. Put us like around a bunch of smart people and we'll figure out a way to make it happen. And so I think it was a great opportunity, like to just kind of, yeah, I had no idea what the forces look like in other parts of the world. So it was really cool.
Yeah, it's good. Interesting what you're saying there about, I know it help a lot of guys when they transition, and a lot of them are like me. They didn't go to university. So, the issue you now have is that everything you have to have a master's degree or a bachelor's, and it's like, okay, but what's that bachelor's in, and what have you learned? I know for a fact, and I speak to some of these Fortune 500s, and they'll take a veteran over a student from university any day. And because we don't have those academic abilities, but what we do is so many skill sets that you don't get in the civilian life. We're used to dealing with situations where it goes wrong and then reacting to those situation changes. We're comfortable in presenting in front of 500 guys. We don't turn inwards. I always remember, this is when it hit home to me. I remember taking a UK trade investment to Libya, to oil and gas. So it was 4 of the biggest oil companies were presenting to Libya oil and gas because obviously the terminal was about to start. 7th oil-rich country in the world. And of the 4 presentations, only one guy succeeded. The other 3 guys, they weren't comfortable talking. Their slides were out of shape. And I was like, these guys are on 6, 7 figure sums representing these companies. That for us is basics. And that's when I realized actually, we do have a lot of skill sets we take for granted. And we're mission driven. We have a start point, we have an objective, a mission. We don't need to be told how to get there. We'll do it. And then, if something goes wrong, we'll just change course of path. We're very expeditionary special forces. So I try and promote that to those. But again, sometimes when you've got an AI recruitment system or you've got someone in that office who doesn't really know, they're like, well, he hasn't got a master's degree. I'm like, okay. So
Yeah, I'm a big proponent any sort of people and culture initiatives. Like, yes, education in certain aspects. Like, if they're a medical doctor, yes, we need that education in particular training. There's certain roles that like that school is a requirement, hands down. We get this, but a lot of the roles you can pick things up. If you've got a training program and somebody to mentor, there are competencies that can be taught, but the like adaptability, resilience, being able to just like pivot in an insane amount of time or multiple times throughout a week, throughout a quarter, throughout a year. There's not many people that handle that well or haven't had enough experiences that have tested them to sort of build up that kind of grit to just figure it out. And I think
yeah,
it's a big kind of miss for some companies for sure of sort of passing up people that had that because they don't have the education.
I see interviews and I see articles. I don't mean it's long. They've already picked up on it. They're not. These people aren't coming in on time. They don't have the right attitude. They don't know how to communicate properly. Using all those sort of skill sets. So interesting.
Yeah. And so, what would you kind of, I guess, looking forward and chatting with entrepreneurs in different companies, what would be kind of, your advice for leadership entrepreneurs kind of facing their breaking moments and how to kind of navigate better through adversity?
I think for me is you need to believe that you're going to do it. I'm a visionary. I believe I'm going to do it. And I think, and if you have a workforce, that's important as well, because if they have doubt in you, that has that waterfall effect. I believe it.
Yeah.
Positivity is contagious, but so is negativity, so is fear and things like that. And so it starts with yourself. You're the example. When I said this in the military, I never asked my students I wouldn't do myself. If I told them to do 50 press ups, I'm not stood there over them. I'm in the mud with them as well. So do with them. And I think obviously, there is uncertain times. And, some people are like, oh, shall I, shan't I? Shall I do something else? And there's a quote I used in the military, and it can be for anything. And it's anticipation is worse than participation. A lot of people are overthinking at the front end, and it's like, just don't overthink it, just do it. And then when you actually come through, you look back and realize actually it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. And then the other one I would say, and I don't like this word failure. I hate the word failure because a lot of people are scared of that word. They're scared, if I'm going to do this, how does it look if I don't succeed? So I call it experience. It's an experience. And no, we do it in the military. One of the reasons we're the best special forces in the world isn't because we've got the best caliber of guys, best training. It's because we're always learning from our mistakes. We're always evolving. When we used to come back to operations, exercises, whatever we're doing, before we go get showered, clean our weapons, have some food, we would have what's called a hot debrief. And it was 3 simple questions. It was what worked, what didn't work. And if we were to do that again, what would we do differently? And we always learned from that. And so I'd say that to the entrepreneurs out there as well, is, what worked, what didn't, what did you do differently? Take that experience, not a failure. And as long as you don't repeat that, then you've learned from that. It's when people then fail or have an experience and then have another experience, it's like, well, you haven't learned.
Yeah, I agree. No, I agree with the language shift there from experience to failure. It's a big, good mental click to kind of be able to handle those things better and not let it kind of catapult you down. And I'm curious for you and whether they kind of go through this more in sort of like special forces training or if it was just kind of innately within you in terms of how like strategies or how you keep your composure in really tough situations or making really tough decisions. Is there anything that you kind of go to as a way to sort of calm yourself down to make sure you're making a call with clarity?
In the military, it was training. We would repeat something so many times that it's almost second nature. We generally believe that we were going to succeed. There was never a point. It's that whole positivity starts at the top all the way down. And
Yeah.
so that it just doesn't mean you don't have fear. You have fear, but you're also very confident in your abilities that you will succeed. So that was a lot was through training, and now they do breath work and all these other great things as well, which help him. Now, oh, don't get me wrong, I'm more scared in the entrepreneurial world, but and it literally is Alana. I look at Alana. Alana's like my commanding officer. It's like, right, what are we doing? And
I love
it's he says yeah, then I'm like, okay. It's like when we moved over to America. Alana's like, I think we should move to America. We always wanted to, and I was like, okay. I think she probably do the same with me. Is like, well, if Dean says yeah, but it's probably there, so we probably take more risks than other couples. Yeah, but those. I do have those sort of different fears in this. Coming over here as an immigrant. Are we going to get our visa? We're going to have to go back to UK. We've spent the last 4 years of uncertainty. Now we have our green cards. We know we're going to be here 10 years, so we can make more of a longer distance plan. But our lives are very unique in the fact that something can change in a day. What you make a plan. For example, the Israel thing. I'm in Disneyland on October 7th. October 8th, I'm in Tel Aviv. That's the sort of life we're in. And but I like it like that because it reminds me of that time in the military. I like to keep busy. For me, I don't know, when I'm sat around doing nothing,
That's when you're in trouble. Yeah.
in trouble. Yeah. So we have lots of projects going on, knowing that some will stick, some won't. And so, yeah, throw enough of them out there, keep you busy.
Yeah. And you've touched on like a couple interesting things, but what would you kind of, as you look forward and now being in the entrepreneurial world and all the training, what do you think kind of entrepreneurs can learn from the military's approach to problem solving and teamwork? You've highlighted a couple, but I'd love to kind of like condense it.
I think with teamwork there is no leader. I know when I went to when we were in the special forces, that obviously the commander would plan the operation, but he would then go around the whole room regardless of whatever rank. And then you then all felt like you're involved, but also the fact that you don't know where these guys have come from, where they've probably been on similar operations before. So there is that classlessness. It starts, everyone's on the same level playing field. Everyone has a voice. And you're not criticized. Military will, the guys naturally wind you up on things like that with teamwork, but also mentoring a person. I always, wherever I got in the military, I mean, there's new guys coming in. I always remembered where I started. I didn't join the military as a tier 1 special forces operator. I joined at 67 kilos, thinking I was going to be a fireman. You all have these start points, and I think some people forget that as well. I do like organization. There's a few organizations out there where you can't come in at board level or C-suite. You have to start from the ground up. That's good. But I know that, is it Amazon? I think Amazon board members, what they do is if you're having a board meeting, I mean, what the title or the subject is, you're already gone in there with preconceived, you've got ideas, you've already been, chatted to a few people. And so what they do is they don't tell them what their board meeting's about. The paper's turned over, and then they read 20 minutes to give their natural feedback. They haven't been influenced by other, conversations. And what they do, they actually go around the room, and whoever's the peer in the room, he or she, they don't speak till last. So their input doesn't have an influence on their decision making, and that's very similar to what we do in the military. Yeah, they'll have a plan, but we can start pulling it apart. And it's great leadership, because actually someone probably had a better plan than you. I'll take that one.
Yeah, well, I think that's missed too. I've never heard that. That's really interesting. I think there's always too that fear, especially if you come in prepped or you're maybe more junior on the team and you're getting put in front of that C-suite. There's already a level of fear coming in that potentially I'm not smart enough, or am I getting fired, or what's going to happen in this meeting. But to come back and then already know that you're on the same playing field as everybody. And again, kind of coming back to, I think, instilling that trusting in your skills, and then being able to know that I can adapt to whatever's about to happen in front of me. I think that that's really important.
Yeah, we do actually. When you were just talking there, like before, when I would go around the world, we realized after Libya that, I was going away far too much. So now we don't leave the house unless it's cleared by 5 people. And it's literally me, Alana, and the kids. So the kids even have a say. If the kids say No, I don't think so. So they even have level playing field in this house as well. They have a voice as well.
I love that. That's amazing. Well, I'd love to kind of go into like rapid fire question mode and pull a couple more stories out. So, what is one daily habit or practice you have to keep you sort of grounded in the world that you're in? I asked Alana the same question. There's a lot of darkness in some of the things that you do. So, how do you kind of come back to ground base?
Ground base, Alana grounds me. If I ever do that, Alana will ground me. But I think my children ground me. When I'm home, a lot of people say, what hobbies do you have? And literally anytime I'm home, I'm with the family. So I'm naturally grounded anyway with them around me. I don't have any habits.
Yeah, I love that. What's the most unexpected lesson you've learned from your transition from special forces to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, well, when I left the special forces, I was there with tier one operators. So these guys are these guys were very successful, very driven and things like that. And it's a fault of the military slightly is the military give you a perception of civilians. And it's like, my perception of civilians was that these people are lazy, they don't know how to tell the time, all these things. So I already had like these aliens,
Yeah,
and
they don't
interesting.
get it.
They don't get it. They don't get it. But actually, I quickly realized that, a lot of guys and girls struggle when they're going out, where do I fit in the society? And actually, there's nothing wrong with this group here, which is the civilian. It's us that are unique. And as soon as we realize that, we need to fit into their world, not the other way around. And so that was something that stood out for me and I picked up quite quick. But the other one was I spent a bit of time looking for another team. It's like a tribe. You're looking for another to be with. I'm looking for that tier one operator. And then actually I didn't realize she was always with me anyway. And Alana is more driven than anyone I know. There's a work ethic of 10 tier one operators. And so that surprised me. I'm looking what I thought, and actually the civilian community, there's a lot of tier one operators out there. They just don't look the same.
Unlucky you, you got to marry one and you didn't even know it at first.
Exactly.
I love it. So if you could go back and kind of give yourself any advice at sort of your lowest moment, whether that was the injury or kind of any other point, what would you say to yourself?
I don't think I'd ever change anything. I think, you can't be experienced without experiences, good or bad. And it shapes you where you are today. When I was in the military, I ended up between Germany and going on my commando course, I ended up going into Colchester prison for the military for 56 days. But I learned a lot from that. I took things, it didn't affect my career, thankfully. But yeah, I wouldn't change anything because I wouldn't be the person in front of you if I did change something.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. What does true resilience look like to you?
True resilience for me is just getting up every day, regardless what's in front of you, whatever the hurdle is. It's never a straight road. The road will be windy, there'll be obstacles along the way, but just showing up every day, that for me is resilience. You don't always have to be achieving every time. It's like the iceberg, innit? Everyone sees success on the top, but don't see everything below. Resilience is that chipping away at that for me, is regardless what's in front of you, you just keep going forward, just get up every day and have the right attitude as well. Not that woes me attitude because there is something in front of you.
And then kind of connected, but a little bit different. In your own words, define what being built for this means to you.
Built for this? Define built
Yeah.
for this. Built for this is basically you shaping yourself for whatever it is you're doing. It's like the military. I always say that the military, you go in there and you're like a wooden cube, and then, you just, every time you have those experiences, you're chipping away, you've learned something new. And so for me, it's a bit like the experience, can't be experienced without experiences is, built for this is you take those experiences and you sort of then carve them into where you're going forward, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. And I think it kind of inadvertently chats
I know
about
where I was
like all
going
the
in my
different
head.
pieces.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to just talk it out and eventually it all connects.
Yeah.
But no, that's perfect. Well, that's amazing. I thank you for coming on today, Dean, and like letting us know that the defining moments aren't the ones that break you. They're the ones that prove you're built for this. So we will keep you posted on all things next. But if somebody wants to get in touch with you, something you said spoke to them, how and what is the best way for people to reach out to you and
Yeah, so I am on social media, believe it or not. This
Yeah.
is the nemesis.
For the good stuff. Yeah.
I am on Instagram, so you can message me on Instagram. I manage my own page. There's also deanstott.com, the website. There's a few things on there. We'll put out some future projects on there, but there's a contact page on there. You can get hold of me.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna.